I feel proud to say Notion's cash flow positive to my dad, who's like,
सही जगह पे काम कर रहा है.
He's like, ये क्या चल रहा है? Investor से पैसे ले रहे हो? आपका loss चल रहा है यहाँ पे? असली धंधा नहीं है. At the WWDC 2010, Steve Jobs mentioned it in his keynote, which was something we knew was going to happen. Actually, the company didn't go anywhere for 4 or 5 years. In India, you look around, what are people doing with the smartphone and the data? At homes, at shops, anywhere you go, you're just watching viral videos.
You built a startup and sold it for $90 million in 2013 to LinkedIn.
Probably getting about like 1,000 users a day, and we used to be ecstatic.
Today, 100,000 people signed up. Akshay, thank you so much for taking out the time.
Yeah.
I just, last week before coming to US, I had a look at Ishan's tweet in which he said that Notion just passed 100 million users. And that is insane. I started using Notion in 2019 after I watched Ali Abdaal talk about it. And then I started working with Notion in 2020. So like all things come together. I wanted to understand your journey and Notion's journey along with it. I think a lot of people who are watching this video are either in college or just starting their job. And a lot of them use Notion. So wanted to understand the behind the scenes of what that looks like and how did you get here in the first place. So again, a lot to talk here. I want to go back to the time when you were 18, just like the people who are watching this. And how did you get started? You built a startup and sold it for $90 million in 2013 to LinkedIn, and then became the head of LinkedIn India, and then went on to join Notion as the co-founder. So there's a lot to learn from Akshay. We'll start from the origin when you were 18. All to you.
Well, origin takes me even back. I guess I grew up in Ahmedabad pretty much until high school. And, in some ways I feel like it sort of hit the jackpot because I was growing up in Gujarat, and Gujaratis are such amazing entrepreneurs. And my roots are Rajasthan, and I feel like Marwadis are such great business people. And so to have that combo, it's a bit of a nice DNA to have. I have two brothers, like one older, one younger. In my extended family, my older brother was among the first to come to the US to study here. So I think he was the real trailblazer. Mm-hmm. And then I sort of just followed his footsteps. I came out here when I was 17 to do my engineering college in the US. And there's a lot to sort of unpack there. I think just that transformation of like how we study in India and then how sort of academics and sort of experiences here. But I think I very much credit a lot of the US college system in really shaping who I am today, in terms of really sort of giving the flexibility to learn the things I wanted to learn. And I think a lot of internships I did here. As luck would have had it, after I graduated from Purdue in the summer of 2007, I moved out to California to work for a venture capitalist. And I did that for a year. And as someone who just graduated from undergrad and became an investor, I very quickly realized that I didn't have a whole lot to offer to entrepreneurs because I hadn't sort of operationally worked at a company before. Mm-hmm. And so after about a year, I sort of was itching to get to the other side of the table, wanting to start something of my own, but I didn't know what it was going to be or who it was going to be with. And so I applied to Stanford and MIT as like a backup option, as a way to sort of go do masters. And it was a backup because...
Do you think that's how people do masters?
Yeah. Well, I also think 2007 was a weird year where there were too many people. It was like actually a boom time. There's like a lot of people applying for their H1 visas and not many people getting it. So I don't know if you remember this, but in 2008, they did a lottery. So essentially like the first day or the second day, they got enough applications. They did a lottery and they decided which person's going to stay. And I actually didn't make it. And so I sort of had applied to go to do masters as a way to potentially like maybe study more or maybe get back to building. And it ended up being like a blessing in disguise. Like, I started my master's at Stanford the week Lehman Brothers collapsed. And so to be able to get out of finance and actually like be studying again was actually fun. I think
Were you worried at that point with the whole thing going down, people getting unemployed?
I would be very worried if I was still in that industry, but luckily I'd sort of left a few months before that. And actually, it's been an interesting theme in my life where I sort of feel like every time I sort of really want something, like that specific thing doesn't actually play out, but something else plays out. It actually tends to be better. And that's one of the examples of like, I sort of thought that, finance is the place to be. And, because it was like the highest paying job, like you work hard. It was just like a glamorous life. But as luck would have had it, I ended up spending 2 years at Stanford, and pretty much every quarter I try to start a company. And I think like people think Pulse was like this overnight success, but I think before Pulse, there were 5 quarters of failed projects that didn't become a company. And in many ways, it was good. It was good to go through that journey because by the time I did Pulse, I didn't make some of the common mistakes people make.
What were the first few failed ideas that you worked on?
Quite a few. So for the summer between the 2 years, we actually got a grant from Lightspeed Ventures. And I worked on this idea called, I think it was called Zap Text. Actually, it started with ZenMail, which was essentially like this idea that, people are spending so much time on the car and people have so much email. So combine the two, can you get like audio email? And this was back in 2009 when the audio synthetic voice sounded like a robot. So it was like a good theoretical idea, but like, you wouldn't want to listen to this thing for more than 5 minutes. So that evolved into, in the summer, we built this thing called Zap Text, which was essentially being able to text someone without typing. So you just have a I think Nokia used to have this back in the day. Like you just pre-recorded a bunch of text messages like yes, no, be there. I'm running 5 minutes late. And so
suggestions.
Yeah. So essentially we built that in the summer. And so this was 2009 summer, right? And I think in many ways I realized that product, we gave up on it too early, but actually like it had some product market fit. Like a lot of people were using that product not to send the pre-recorded text, but to send free text messages. And if we had stayed with it, who knows, maybe we would have like invented WhatsApp. Because I think like essentially like that's what allowed people to sort of send messages without paying for it. But anyway, we sort of gave up on that. We did a bunch of data visualization. There was a data visualization project. We did some work around automation, like lighting, home lighting automation using your phone. Bunch of these different things that I think in many ways, like I think they were probably like more ideas that didn't have deep customer pain. It was more like technology allows you to do this, so why not just build it? So that was actually a common mistake in some of those threads. I think the other mistake was probably that I felt like the desire to start a company or desire to be an entrepreneur was way higher than desire to solve a problem, right? So it's a fine line.
Do you think that is actually common with many people over here? Like,
I don't know if I think it's generally common. I think in the Bay Area, entrepreneurship is sort of in the air. Like you breathe it. Like in Stanford, like if I told someone I have a job to go work at Microsoft, people would sort of look at you and be like, "Sorry, it didn't work out." Like because I think like starting a company is the plan A. Like getting a job is essentially like a bit of like a plan B. And so I think a lot of people start with that intention. I think like when you go through a few of these experiences, you realize that actually like that's not, it's kind of like you're trying to solve a problem is why you sort of keep working on it for long periods of time. And the company sort of becomes around it. But I would say the first few instances when I started, I was just excited to be an entrepreneur, excited to start a company, excited to sort of live the dream. And again, I'm very glad to have had those experiences. And I think like crashing and burning through those ideas in some ways made Pulse possible because Pulse was a bit more grounded in customer pain, a bit more grounded in solving a problem that I had. And so it's sort of all culminated in my last quarter at Stanford. And
so the learning that you had is that you should stay very near to the customer and the problem that they are facing and not towards the latest tech and what you can build with it. It should basically come from the problem and then go back and look at, is there enough technology to build it?
Yeah, essentially, like I think technology should be a means to an end, right? And I think the idea is that, once either you have a pain yourself or you sort of experience pain around you that you're trying to solve, I think technology becomes a means to solve that pain. And if you're able to do that and solve a meaningful problem, people will come. Whereas I think the initial versions of my ideas were always tech can do this, so why don't we just build that? It's a bit more theoretical, a bit more like, more like, what's possible? Let's just build that, rather than like, what actual pain are we solving?
Were you like a person were you like a one-man army? You would like build everything yourself? Or would you have like a friend who would like code it and you would just have the idea?
No, so I think my strengths lie in the sort of intersection of maybe like product and business, maybe design and business. At Pulse, I had the good fortune of partnering with Ankit, who was my classmate at Stanford, and he was at IIT before that. And his strength was very much like maybe like product and tech. And so as a combination, I think we did really well together, where he was like sort of the tech coding brains behind Pulse, and I was more of the design and sort of business part of it. And
what is Pulse? People are hearing about it, but what exactly was Pulse?
Pulse was interestingly so it was actually a class project at Stanford, and I think the idea was to essentially build a quick, fast way to read news on your mobile devices. And we actually started on the iPad because that was something that had just launched then. And there used to be a product back in the day called Google Reader, which was essentially being shut down around that time. And the challenge with Google Reader was essentially it looked a bit like an inbox. It was very text heavy. It was and in many ways, I think it used this underlying technology called RSS, which I think it still exists, where every publisher publishes that, and then you can use that to sort of create like a stream of news stories. So in many ways, like Pulse started off as like a visual RSS reader, which essentially meant that it took all the news stories from the RSS feeds, but then it was more like pictures first, and you could visualize the news stories from the day. And it's something we built like in 6-7 weeks in Stanford, like in this class. And it just took a life of its own. Like it was never meant to be a company. It was meant to essentially just build something that we felt like would solve our pain of sort of having something quick on your phone. And it turns out a lot more people had that problem.
And you launched it in the Stanford campus.
We launched it by just putting it in the App Store. And back then, there were not that many apps in the App Store. I think like there were less than 100 apps in the news category. That's where we launched. And a couple of weeks later, at the WWDC 2010, Steve Jobs mentioned it in his keynote, which was not something we knew was going to happen. And that sort of overnight became a company, because essentially we had so many people who downloaded the app, and we decided, okay, well, let's just spend the summer on this because it seems to be working. And this summer became a full-time role. We raised money for it.
And how would you monetize that?
The initial version was actually $4 for the app itself. So we were actually selling the app for $4. And I think we sold something like 250,000 copies. It's actually like in some ways like this, at least for the two of us, like we had about $700,000 post Apple tax. That was enough to like spend a year on it.
Very nice. And then how did the acquisition happen by LinkedIn?
Yeah, so we ran it for about 3 years. We grew the team to about 25 people. And we grew to almost 30 million users. And we were at the
30 million paying users you're talking about?
No, I think we had made it free after a few months.
It became a freemium model.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think, so we were at a fork in the road in 2013 where I think we could either scale the business side of things, which would mean that really scale out the advertising model, or sort of join hands with another company where we could continue to scale out the product more. I think like in general, we got lucky. We found a partner in LinkedIn where, if you think about it, like LinkedIn actually had at least back then, deep identity and network data, but did not have as much sort of content flowing through the homepage at least 10 years ago. And we were the exact opposite. We had all the content, we had deals with the publishers, we had the users reading news, but we had no idea who these people were and who they're connected to. So it's very complementary for both. And this was like 10 years ago, the LinkedIn homepage was pretty bare bones.
Boring.
Yeah. It was essentially like, Akshay has some skills, Akshay has a new job, Akshay is connected to this person. That was the feed. And together, I think LinkedIn's feed today is very useful and has like a large number of people visiting it every single day.
And they just introduced the video feed now. There's just like Instagram and TikTok now.
Okay, yeah. I feel like all the social media or sort of all companies have sort of like defaulted to that. And
TikTokification.
I'm a bit sad about that, I think. It's like you're just one or two clicks away to slipping into this endless stream of viral videos.
Yeah, especially on Twitter, like you would watch a video, you'd open it, it would automatically switch to the next one. And it's just very weird. I was like, what just happened? I was watching this video.
Yeah.
It didn't replay. It just switched over to the next one. So I thought that LinkedIn would be the last one.
The screen, it just keeps playing in the background. So I don't know. I'm not, I just came back from India. Like I spent a couple of weeks there and I was so optimistic about this idea that everybody will have a smartphone and everybody will have cheap data and everybody is going to be connected to the world. And
then what happened?
And then you're in India, you look around you and like, what are people doing with the smartphone and the data? Like at homes, at shops, at like anywhere you go, like the watchman on the building is just watching viral videos all day long.
Reels and playing MPL.
Yeah.
So
essentially betting. I wonder like what could have been with all this access to amazing information to like what people are doing with it. It's a bit sad. Now, I'm sure there's still amazing stories of like people like in villages who suddenly have access to like all these amazing education. But in general, it feels a bit like sort of lost productivity. Like I think these devices were supposed to be about creating things, right? Like that's what the computing pioneers thought about, was that the computers and the phones is about like we can all be creative, like together we can create things. You're creating this podcast with it, right? Whereas so much of it has now become about consumption. It's like the sort of the creation to consumption ratio seems oddly off.
The consumption becomes progress and not actually doing the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which to me, I feel like, I don't know, I sort of hope that more people can find ways to create things on their phones or even like consume, like what are you consuming? Like what's your information diet? Like I think hopefully it's more.
Does that not happen here in SF?
Like the ability to consume.
The same addiction that people have in India, or what they're doing with the data that they have access to.
It's probably happening all over.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not good. It feels kind of like, I hope people consume podcasts like this rather than like some viral video that was published 12 years ago, then, got recycled to Twitter, then got recycled to Reels, then got recycled to LinkedIn now. That can't be good for the world. But again, like the incentives are really off, right? Like these companies need to keep feeding you this because that proves engagement is better. But is that actually like helping the world? I don't know. Maybe
it's weird for me as a creator, right? So for example, like today morning, 9:00, it was 9:30 in India at night. I just posted a Instagram reel, and 1 hour later, I just got 150K views. 150K views, 150K people watching that in about a span of 1 hour.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't I put it out? But then obviously there has to be mindfulness in people who are consuming it.
Yeah. I think there is something about also maybe like, it's like human nature where I think like, as a medium, I find video to be just a lot more engaging. Like on a human level, like I sort of like almost prefer even watching podcasts because it's like so engaging, right? And so that's definitely resonating with people. But then also like I think some of these things, like even the videos that I've watched of yours, like are short, and the short ones like are something that I can consume on the go. So there's something about it that is resonating with it, but hopefully the information sort of diet that people have all around the world is balanced. And I don't know, I have that hope for the world. I actually think a lot about sort of what we do at Notion today. Like, we are trying to build something where people can create things with it. Like,
how did you get here? After you sold to LinkedIn, you became the LinkedIn India head. And then how did the switch happen from there to Notion?
Yeah, so 2013, Pulse was acquired by LinkedIn. And I had made some I sort of have newfound money. And
how did that feel? Was it all stock? Was it cash? How was it? Or you're not allowed to disclose?
No, it was public information. It was 90% stock, but it was a liquid stock. Like it was a public company and 10% cash. It was a very weird feeling, to be honest. I think part of it is like, I grew up in a sort of middle income family with, we had all the money for...
Which city were you born in?
In Ahmedabad.
Ahmedabad.
We had all the money for things we needed, but, not all the money for things we wanted. So it was a good balance in some ways. And when I came to the US, like, especially as an Indian, you sort of feel like the conversion ratio sort of kicks in, and so you're saving.
I always convert the Uber. So I was coming here, so I checked the Uber, it was like $15. I'm like, 1,000 rupees lag rahe yahan pe aane ke liye. But I didn't think it that much, but like a normal person would think a lot. Like if you come here for the first time. So yeah.
Back in the day, I remember my first US trip was 97. The airport carts, it's cost $8 now to take one of the airport carts.
It's not free?
It's not free. But back in 97, I remember if you return the cards to the system, you'd get 50 cents. And I remember it was just like, that's such a fun game as a kid to just like find airport cards, put it in there, make a few dollars. But anyways, like the point being like, I think when you grow up with like, sort of a certain way of operating, and you're very comfortable with that. I was very comfortable with that also. So that when you actually sort of like, when we actually sold Pulse for about 90 million, you feel a bit confused. It's like, what happened? Like, it actually felt like life was easier when your optimization function was like, okay, aaj, graduate ho gaye, $60,000 a year ki salary mil gayi, 60,000 mein you can like, you pay your rent, you like have some good food, you go to India once or twice a year, it's set. And suddenly you feel like, wow, the optimization function is like, what do I do? Like, I don't need to work for rent.
Does your Gujarati also have accent?
I can speak cute Gujarati. But in many ways, and the other thing is like, I think people around you expect you to change, right? Because you're like, and I remember I used to drive a 2006 Toyota Corolla when, and people sort of expected that I would go get another car, and I kept driving. I did not, because I felt like, let's give it some time. And
it didn't come to your head.
Or I sort of like, okay, well, I do want to like spend it on things, but like, I don't want to rush anything, right? And why change because somebody else is expecting for you to change? And so I don't know. It took me a year or two to get comfortable with this idea that, I remember even with Ivan, actually, sometimes when we go to a meeting together, like, just like habit, right? I'll drop him and I'll be like, okay, wait a second here. I'm going to go find free parking. And Ivan's like, just park in the parking lot, and like pay the dollar. But again, like, the old habits die hard. So I don't know. I think it was probably like confusing for like a year or two. But then like you sort of realize like, wow, like the small things that you can actually buy. So like anything that's sub $10 now, I don't think about it. Because I'm just like, you know what, like peace of mind, comfort. But I don't really have that many expensive habits. So I think other things don't have to change as much. Also, India has like the extended family feels like, Pulse was sold for 90 million. So like all 90 million has come to me. It's like, they don't understand this concept. Like it's like a small, I owned
but you did
portion of it.
Build your own pot of gold.
But anyways, I did that. And then I think Notion was my first investment.
You invested in Notion?
I invested in Notion to 2013. I knew Ivan because I tried to hire him for Pulse. And when he started the company, I invested. And I invested because I really genuinely was very excited about the mission.
So what was like the 1 minute pitch that Ivan had for Notion back then, 11 years ago?
Well, I think the large pitch, which is still true today, is that there's 1 billion knowledge workers and there's only 20 million developers. And the 20 million developers decide the software that the 1 billion knowledge workers use. And there's general rigidity in that software. You can't customize it. You can't build your own thing. And so for you to build software, you have to go learn programming, which is a very hard thing for most people. And so the idea was like, if you could decompose the software down to the basic building blocks, there's only 20, 25 building blocks that really matter for every piece of software. Can we give that to people and then people can build software without having to learn how to code? That was the original pitch, was to really democratize software making. Like anybody can build software without having to code.
Really cool. And then you invested and became the CEO, the founder.
So I invested and then I was still with LinkedIn. So I spent 5.5 years with LinkedIn. And actually the company didn't go anywhere for 4 or 5 years.
What happened? Like there was no growth?
No. So I think, well, first of all, like we didn't launch the product for a long time, but also the product that the initial product of this idea that people can build software actually did not work. And I think the learning was that theoretically it was a great idea, but most people don't wake up wanting to build software. Most people wake up just to do their job. And so, we had this dream platform where you can build your own software, but we had no users. And I think we had to sort of dumb it down a bit and really sort of start with like note-taking or to-do list or a knowledge hub as a way to get people into the product and as a way to get people value initially. So that was launched in 2017.
Which market did you target for the first time? Was it like the students? Was it like working professionals, freelancers? What was it?
I think mostly individuals, like students and startups. And it's still very much the two segments we care a lot about today, which is college students, high school students, but also like new startups. The startups is actually like where the multiplayer business kicked in, where you could use it to take notes yourself. But then when suddenly you collaborate with other people, then it becomes like a knowledge hub. And that's what really sort of drove initial part of the business. So that happened in 2017. And in 2018, we launched databases, which is not only the knowledge hub, but now you can actually build all sorts of interesting project management or application tracking system or CRM with it. And then I joined later in 2018. I was the, I think, 9th employee here. So I'm a bit of an acquired founder in some ways.
But that's a very interesting story. So you did not become a founder on the first day, but then you became a founder later on. How does that work?
How does that work? I think it mostly works because of Ivan's generosity. I joined as a COO in 2018, and then I've basically worn every possible hat in this company. I've sort of managed all different functions except for engineering. Pretty much all functions at some point have reported to me, and I've sort of built it up and then passed it on to the leader. And after a few years, Ivan was sort of noticing that my job kept changing every few months. It's like, what do we call Akshay? COO makes little sense.
Yeah, entrepreneur in residence.
And so, so essentially some sort of entrepreneur executive residence. And so he was kind enough to sort of make me a co-founder. And Simon is the other co-founder. And Simon also joined us as an intern and stayed on to build a lot of the early part of Notion. So we're the 3 musketeers here. And it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun building with them. And what started off as like a small team is now like close to 800 people.
How did you get the first paying user? I wanted to know about that.
I think the first paying customer probably precedes me, but I think essentially the first version of the product was note-taking. If you used it alone, it was $5 a month. If you used it as a team, it was $10 per person per month. And the way it worked was essentially like we have a concept of blocks in Notion. And it's a free product, and you basically can add up to 1,000 blocks. At the end of 1,000 blocks is when you have to pay to upgrade to the Plus plan. And it was probably some startups around here were the early customers. And then when we launched in Product Hunt, one interesting thing that happened for us is that we really took off in Western Europe and Eastern Asia. And it's still true today. Like our second largest market is Japan. Our third largest market is Korea. And then UK, Germany, France are really, really important, like sizable markets for us. And it's always been true from the very beginning. And so it's been a very global company. Yeah, we're very blessed with that. Like I think 80% of our usage and 70% of our business is outside the US. And so from the very early on, we had to sort of think about how to support all of our customers all around the world.
There's one thing I want to talk about, and that is the design philosophy of Notion. How did you come up with it? Because it really stands out. It's so simplistic, yet you can do so much with it. So tell me about that. How was it built? How did you know that, okay, this is the right way to go? And how was it all designed?
Well, I think a lot of it probably, again, comes from sort of like Ivan and Simon's genius in the early days. In many ways, I feel like both of them, I think like the way to describe it is probably like Simon's sort of the architect and like Ivan's the interior designer, right? And maybe I'm the realtor like selling the business. Yeah, I think there's probably like a clean, like Japanese, like Asian aesthetic to it. I think a lot of people like how simple it is. Like there's a sense of the product design or ethos where it's almost like you cannot build something ugly with it. Like, and I think part of it comes from giving very few choices. Like there's only 3 typographies you can use. There's only certain ways like it fits into the grid structure of the product. And a lot of that is very deliberate in a way where like you could look at a page and you could know that it was built in Notion or, right? So there's that element. I think there's the other element, which is like the ethos is still like allowing you to build software, like allowing you to go that extra mile, right? It's like, when I think about like, okay, well, I don't know, maybe someone who doesn't know how to code, the most they can do is maybe like build up a website. That's where they stop. And our hope is that you don't have to stop at the website. Like you can actually like tweak it enough to build your own software, or you can build a template and put it into the marketplace and, you know, build things with Notion. And so there's that great saying where it's like, you know, you gotta ideally like the product you build keeps simple things simple and complex things possible, right? Which is how we think about it. It's almost like it's a bit of like a video game where you come in, it's simple, but as you go deeper, you feel like you can go to level 5 or level 6 where you can do much more complex things with it. But it's it's progressive. It's like slowly introducing you to all the possible like powerful things you can do with Notion. But we do it in a way that's elegantly introduced to you and doesn't overwhelm you as much.
I feel like it's one thing to get to 1 million users, but to get to 100 million is another ball game, right? So what do you think in the last 4-5 years has worked really well for Notion in order to get that viral loop going in and getting people signing up? What traction channel helped out the most?
I think primarily organic. And so I think there's been a few inflection points. I think when I joined, we were probably getting about like 1,000 users a day, and we used to be ecstatic that there's like so many people signing up with it. And I feel like in the past 5-6 years, I think that's scaled up to now probably like, I don't know, north of 100,000 users a day sign up with it.
So today, 100,000 people signed up.
More than that signed up today, yeah.
Wow.
And if you take a step back and think about you just look at the graph for the last 5 years, it's not like it's a bit like, you know, you catch a new level, then you stay there for a bit until you catch a new wind. For us, I think like early days, I think we benefited a lot from, I think we had like, I remember one of the inflection points was students. We made it free for students to, like even beyond 1,000 blocks, they can actually get free plans.
Yeah, I entered my email ID, my .edu.
There you go. So that was actually a big inflection point. I remember that clearly because I thought like, okay, when we launched it, we'll get a spike, But then I thought it will come back down to like maybe like what it was last week. But in the student launch, we got a spike and then it just stayed there. Like, and every day we would get more students using us. So that was a big one. And then we actually used that to make the personal plan free completely. So if you're using it alone, whether you're a student or not, at this point, we actually don't ask you for money because all of our businesses primarily become team or B2B based.
Yeah, I think the best part about Notion is that it doesn't force you to pay. I've used a lot of products and they'll use some tactic or the other to get you to this place where you have to pay.
Yeah.
So that was actually really good.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who've been using Notion for like 5 years, and I sometimes bump into them and they're like, I have a question for you. Like, why don't you ask me to pay? Like, I would pay you a lot more, and it's actually, for us, we lucked out in that we don't actually have to charge people using a loan any money. So when we made the personal plan fee, that was another bump. But a lot of it is probably like, I don't know, I think there is a aspect of, I think we're very blessed to have this, but a lot of people say that when they use Notion, there is not just a utilitarian thing, but there's something that sort of, it makes them feel good. Like there's a positive sort of feeling component using the product. And part of it comes from the clean aesthetic and maybe the delightfulness that it actually works the way your brain works or something. And so people who sort of figured it out, they can't stop talking about it. Like if you search for Notion on YouTube, you'll see like all these crazy videos. I mean, you probably shot a couple of them we asked. And I think a lot of people like discover us through that. Like we actually did a recent survey where we asked people, how did you hear about us? It's actually amongst the first time we did it. And some shocking number, like I think something like 30% of the people discover us on YouTube. What's
crazy is that there are the entire creators whose whole identity is that they're a Notion creator. And they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars by selling Notion templates. And that just blows my mind. Like you not just build value for yourself and for the company and investors, but also for creators and enable them to monetize.
We're very excited about that. That actually takes us back to the original mission, right? The original mission was to allow people to build software. Today, people may seem these are just like simple templates that looks like a doc or whatever. But actually, like if you sort of peek underneath, these are systems people have built. Like, people have built like the second brain systems, certain way of life operating system where, they've essentially built a certain way of operating where people are willing to spend $100, $200 on a template. And they're doing that without even us. Like, I think we haven't even like people are buying it in some other website and then getting the template on Notion. It's a bit of a wonky process that we need to fix. But to your point, like there's now like, a dozen people who've probably made over $1 million every year through either selling their education or templates. And
that's insane.
And we're so excited about the future because I think in some ways, like even with the scaffolding we've given them, people have found so much success. And so like if we can give people better scaffolding so that they can actually build true software with it.
Build like a YouTube studio for Notion. That'll be crazy.
Yeah. So like, and again, like any software in success, our hope is like from decades from now, any software could be visualized and you can essentially like build it without having to code.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you think about competition? Because this productivity space, note-taking space, productivity space is very competitive, right? There's so many tools that are out there. How do you develop that advantage and moat, and how do you keep growing? You recently got a valuation of $10 billion, right? So how does that all happen?
Well, I think there's a macro trend here with the different tools people have, which is that I think both on the individual side and on the companies, I think people are realizing there's just too many tools. There's too many specialized tools. Like Ivan likes to call them like toasters. Like all they do is like one thing, right? And I think it's a bit like internet has fragmented that, right? Because essentially you could build like something very specialized, throw some performance marketing dollars on it, and suddenly you have like a business, right? But for the end user, it's actually become kind of a wonky way of working. Like I remember when I was at LinkedIn, like, we had one tool where our product specs were, we had another tool for tasks, we had another tool for wiki, we had another tool for project management, another tool for like engineering task management, another tool for OKRs, another tool for company planning, right? So suddenly I've talked about 7 different pieces of software. And if I have to think about like, okay, well, where was that project? Like, I have no idea. I have no idea where those are. none of these tools actually talk to each other. And so there's a macro trend where I think people just want fewer tools to comprehensively work, like, right? And so yes, like, I think in each of these categories, we compete with a certain product. But the reason we win is not because we have more features or like we have been around for longer. The reason we win is because all of these things that people are trying to do is all built into a single product and tightly integrated with each other, right? And I think people find value there, which is like, it's almost like they can build a system that allows them to like holistically work in one place rather than have to like, go to 7 different tools, right? So I think that's the macro trend that's actually helping us. And I think there's a history there, right? Which is like, if you think about like back in the day, the way we work was a single piece of paper. Like I wrote something, paper was the only medium.
Yeah.
Then in the 80s or 70s, like there was floppy. Like, you put a floppy in there, you run that software, you get that floppy out.
People who are watching would not know about that. They might be too young for it.
I know. I'm sort of setting my age out because I think I was still there when the floppy stuff was there.
Yeah.
But then like, I think in some ways, Microsoft Office brought it together. It's like one package, with 6-8 tools that sort of worked well with each other. And then internet fragmented it again. So I think in some ways, like the pendulum is sort of swinging back to bundled fewer pieces of software, and I think Notion's benefiting from that.
The problem with Silicon Valley in general is that, whenever you build something, it works really well. There's always a fear that a big tech company is going to come up and build something of their own, right? So what was the thought process when Microsoft Loop was announced? What did you think about it? What was the vibe at Notion?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in many ways, I think it was many years in the making because I think they had announced it a while ago. And in many ways also, Google Docs have sort of adapted a lot of the sort of functionality. So I think some of those things are sort of inevitable. And I think part of the reason Notion works is not because there's like just the user experience. It works because it is a single product. And so if you take some of these other products that people are building separately, they still have the underlying issue where like you could use Loop, but you still have to use Word, you still have to use Excel, you still have to use PowerPoint, and you still have to like stitch those things together. And so fundamentally, it isn't actually like changing the behavior large companies have. And it's still sort of like, still has the same issues underlying, right?
Yeah.
I also think like in many ways, like internally, we're a lot more humble about where we are today.
Do you think yourself as a startup or what now?
Well, there's a bit of like, definitely think of ourselves as a startup, but also I think, the media comparing us to 2 companies that are worth $2-3 trillion is flattery. I mean, it's like flattering for us to be compared to those 2, but we're far away from competing with them. Like I think we coexist with them today. In many cases, people have Google or Microsoft accounts for their email and calendar and other things, and so we coexist with them. But also like I think the thing that on a personal front I sort of think about it is like it makes me realize how long you have to play this game, right? So if you think about like. I was in college in the mid 2000s, right? When Google Docs came out, I was literally in undergrad. And when Google Docs came out, like, I think like, I remember that day because it's like sort of like magical. The fact that like I'm writing and you can see it and you're writing that I can see it.
Collaboration
was incredible. Like it didn't exist up until like Google Docs sort of bringing it. And then it's taken them 20 years to sort of become the default in colleges today, right? And so I think the thing that I tell Notion, the company, like people who work here is like, hey, we're on this journey. It's going to take a couple decades. Like I have a 7-year-old daughter and my hope is by the time she goes to college, everyone in her class is using Notion, right? And it's going to take that long, right? And not because it's like we can do it faster, but I think it's just like it will take time for us to be the dominant platform. So that when she graduates and goes to her job, if we still are working 10, 15 years from now, then she will demand Notion at work, right? And so it's sort of like I think we're playing the long game where we don't ask students to pay us for 5-10 years, but it's a long investment in them that when they do go to work and they do use it at a company, they'll pay us then.
Very interesting. A couple of more questions before we end this, and that is, today Notion is huge. There's also Notion Calendar. But how do you think about hiring people, and what sort of ethos have you built at the company?
Well, I think one of the things that we did a few years ago is really codified our values. So we have 4 values, which is we're owners of our mission, we are pace setters, we are truth seekers, and we're kind and direct. And one of the things we try to do is of course, we're going to test candidates on the domain we're hiring them for. But at the end of most interviews, we always have a values interview that is typically done by Ivan himself or me or an executive team member. And we really try to figure out in a, sort of codify that process so that we are able to attract similar values people. Because, the job will change, the projects will change, but the person remains the same. And as long as we're hiring people who have those values, I think that's probably the most important thing for us. I think the other piece I would say that's probably unique to Notion, and again, a lot of credit goes to Ivan for this, is that we've always had a ethos around efficiency or ethos around talent density. And I think part of it came from this belief that it's easier to move a small boat rather than a large ship. And so for us to remain nimble and agile and move fast as the macro changes, I think we're going to sort of keep it dense and keep it very efficient. A good byproduct of that has been that we've always been cash flow positive. And so that's reduced a lot of time that Ivan and I have to spend on fundraising. We've never had to, sort of really spend a lot of time fundraising. And all of that time can be, again, put back into building the product, getting more customers, scaling the business. And so that's actually been a nice feedback loop in some ways. I still remember the first 4 or 5 months I was at Notion. I was hired as the COO, but all I did was essentially answer support tickets because we were drowning in support. And so I sort of did that. And the little time that I did have left, I would try to recruit our first salesperson. And I think Ivan and I probably met 50, 70 salespeople. And every time we got close, I was okay, this might be the person. Ivan's not great, good, but not great. And I think his ability to say no, even when we are deeply in need of a person, is incredible. It makes you feel okay, we can deal with more pain until we find the right person, right? And I think that's, in some ways, that is the best power a founder has, is the veto power, right? Is the ability to say no, even though you need this person yesterday, but they're not great. And so we're going to still keep waiting. Yeah.
What's the future with Notion AI? So it was launched 2 years ago, if I remember correctly.
About a year and a half ago, yes.
Year and a half. Yeah. And where do you think it is going? Are you going to introduce more? What is coming out there?
We're very excited about it. I think that we've gone through this motion where I think we all were very excited about what is possible with AI. And so essentially the ability to get help with writing, ability to now ask questions and get answers have all become possible because of AI. But one thing we've realized over the year and a half has been that that deep down, what we're trying to do is the same thing that we were trying to do for many years, which is how to make you productive, how to sort of enable you to do your best work. And AI is again sort of a means to an end, right? It's like a technology which it's in itself shouldn't be used as what's possible with AI, but what it should be used for is what are the problems we're trying to solve, and how does AI help you do that, right? And so we've realized AI is this new electricity, it's all the things that we were hoping to do in terms of solving the knowledge search problem or the automation of processes and tasks have all become now enabled with generative AI. And so essentially, we're still solving the same problems, but we now have this whole new toolkit that is essentially enabling us to actually deliver on that promise.
What do you think are the skills that for people who are watching can helped them level up, and sort of the skills that has helped you level up from where you were when you were entering Purdue to where you are today? What were those skills? Could be hard, could be soft skills. What would those be?
Well, I studied engineering, and I know you sort of like, you studied a bit of electrical engineering yourself. And I think one of the things that I think about is like, I studied electrical engineering too, and I like rarely use the things I studied at work. But the one thing that I think engineering does train you on is like ability to learn new things. And so I don't know. I think there's an element of like, can you develop the ability to like take on a new topic and sort of go deep and like learn about it? And can you sort of be a learn-it-all, right? Like
Jugadu, basically.
Jugadu is a way of doing it, but although I feel like Jugad sometimes has like a slightly negative connotation of maybe taking shortcuts. But maybe a better version might be like, can you be resourceful and like still like learn new things? Although like, I don't know, I like Jugaad. Like, I mean, the way sort of India operates, finds a way of doing things, you know, is amazing, right? I sort of enjoy that, I think. But yeah, I don't know. I think some, you know, I have 2 young kids, and somebody said like, you know, the only 2 things you need to do for them is like, one is you need to teach them how to learn, and then you need to like make them love to learn. Like if they have those 2 things down, they'll figure it out, right? Like they'll figure out, they'll pick up all the things. And so in some ways, I sort of feel like, I guess maybe the one thing that I think I'm decent at is like I can take up new things. Like at Notion, I've picked up all these different functions that I've never managed before. And like I would just learn on the job by meeting more people, by doing the work, by hiring people, you know, and maybe that's like my core competence. Like it's not like I'm great at brand or great at some specific thing, but I can pick up like new things.
Figure it out.
I can figure it out.
Yeah.
I don't know if I call myself a Jugadu, but I definitely feel like I'm a resourceful person.
Yeah. But what do you think about Gujaratis in US? Why are they so successful? They're like everywhere around here, motels, restaurants, everything that they're building.
Well, they're just like, I mean, they're entrepreneur. Like, it's kind of like, you know, maybe if entrepreneurship is in like every Bay Area resident's blood, I feel like entrepreneurship is in Gujarat.
So you're saying that you had that from your parents, from your environment when you were in Ahmedabad?
Yeah, I mean, Gujaratis are like amongst the most enterprising entrepreneurial people I've come across.
And why that is? Like, what exactly are they taught? Were you taught?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm sure there's some evolutionary sort of like history behind why like people from that region have ended up. But it might be the same for Banyas, I think.
Because like my family has all been teachers. Yeah. So I'm like the first person who started a business. All of this is like, I'm like the anomaly.
Well, there's an element where people can say like what you're doing is also teaching. Like in some ways you're teaching, you know, people are learning from these things. But yeah, like you know, in some ways, like I didn't think about sort of the Gujarati, like or Marwadi influence growing up. Like I think about it now in my late 30s, like how that may have impacted my ability to like start a company or take risk or invest and, you know, do all these different things. So it's a little bit like sort of looking back, you can sort of connect the dots. But at least when I was growing up, I don't think I was like appreciating that I'm growing up in Ahmedabad, you know, with Narendra Modi like as our chief minister, and like and you know, my sort of my roots are Rajasthan and Marwadi businessmen, like, you know,
Marwadi energy,
which I didn't appreciate then, but I very much appreciate now. Like, you know, I feel proud to say Notion's cash flow positive to my dad, who's like, he didn't understand pulse as a business model, because he's like, ये क्या चल रहा है? Investor से पैसे ले रहे हो और आप, you know, आपका loss चल रहा है यहाँ पे, असली धंधा नहीं है. Whereas Notion, he's like, it's a good business.
Okay, last question, and that is, if you were in my shoes today, what one question would you ask Akshay Kothari?
What question would I ask? I think I guess the question I would ask is like, what has sort of like, in my life, I feel like a lot of the things that I planned never really panned out. And so I think learnings from like what I thought would happen and what happened, and like, how I've sort of changed the way I sort of operate on a daily basis is probably something that, we can probably do another episode at some point in the future.
Amazing. This was really insightful, Akshay. Thank you so much for taking out the time. I'm hoping that people would learn a lot from this. And thank you so much. I wish you all the very best with Notion.
Same to you.
And looking forward for people to just go and use Notion as much as possible. I love it.
Great.
Thank you everyone for watching. Share it with people and we'll see you in the next one.